Hello, welcome to our Farmtastic Agventure. Today it's Soil and Trees, and this is presented by the Farm Bureau. And as you, I hope, know, Farm Bureau is all about agriculture. And what is agriculture? Agriculture produces the house you live in, the chair you sit on, clothes you wear, the food you eat, and the job where you work. Agriculture is everywhere. I'm Rita Lammers, and I'm a Farm Bureau volunteer, and I'm your host today. We would like to welcome the following people. First of all, Jennifer Burnett, our office administrator from the Jefferson County Farm Bureau. She serves as our tech coordinator, and so she makes sure we're all online at the same time. Also, today our guest is Wendy Danzansky. Danzansky. She's Natural Resources Specialist for Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District. And Chris Dopp, he's the Stanton Elementary Principal, and he's a tree farmer in Jefferson County. Both of them are featured in your tree and soil ag mag that you received. We asked them questions about their career, and I hope you've read those over so you know a little bit about them. Let's welcome all our classrooms and teachers to the Hangout today. When I recognize your classroom, please give us a wave so we know where you are. First of all, Mrs. Best from North Elementary in Jefferson County. Joining us from Stark and Carroll counties at Sandy Valley Schools are Mr. Hawk and Miss Blackford. Then also from Sandy Valley, Miss Marshall's room and Mr. Baum's room. And from Indian Valley Schools at Port Washington, County, Mr. Glazer's class. Welcome, welcome. Thank you, teachers, for taking the time to join us today. We have so much we want to share with you, and we appreciate your cooperation. First, we'll have Wendy talk with us about soil.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad you could join us today. As she said, my name is Wendy Zadansky, and I work with the Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District. Part of my job as the Natural Resources Specialist there is to help anyone that uses the land or has land figure out how to best keep their natural resources protected and make them more sustainable so that they're there for future generations. So that's pretty much what I do in my everyday job. We're very focused on helping people be good stewards of their water and soil resources in particular. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about soils, because I think it's one of the natural resources that we kind of take for granted. The only way for us to really see soil is to kind of dig down and uncover it. So not that we're not curious about it, but we just tend not to think about it as much. So I'm going to teach you a little bit about soils today. First of all, soils are important in everything that we do. I'm just going to give you a couple examples. I think most everybody knows that soils are needed for producing the agricultural crops that feed the world, essentially. So we need good, healthy soils to help produce those crops. We also need those soils to help produce food for livestock that farmers feed. So soils are very essential in that aspect as well. And we are at the Double M Tree Farm today, and there are lots of trees outside this door right here, and all of those trees are very dependent on the soil beneath them. That soil is providing nutrients for those trees to grow. It's very different than if you would go somewhere where there were poor soils. You might not see as many beautiful trees as you do around here today. And finally, some other ways that soil is important. If you think about the house you woke up in this morning, or the schoolroom that you're sitting in right now, or even the road that you rode on to get to school this morning, those are all structures that are built on top of soil. So we're very dependent on the strength of our soils and the stability of them to build the structures that we take for granted and use every day to make sure that they're safe and stable. So those are just some of the ways that soils are important. So I actually went to the garden this morning after it was done with the torrential downpour, and I dug a couple soil samples because I just wanted to illustrate to you guys a couple of points. You can't really have a soils presentation without looking at the soil itself. So I have 2 soil samples with me today. This one was dug out of undisturbed soil that hadn't been tilled or anything. And then this one here was dug out of the garden where I had tilled up a patch of soil to plant potatoes. If any of you have grown potatoes before, they need a very loose soil so that they can grow right. So in this particular patch of the garden, I tilled it up. It doesn't have any cover on it. These are the exact same soil types. They're literally only 5 feet apart in my yard. So we're going to talk a little bit about this one first. In your ag mag, there was a picture of the different layers of soil. So I'm just going to kind of give you the hands-on version of that. It didn't say that there was an O horizon on there, but there is something called the O horizon that's just beneath this grass here, and that is considered your organic layer. And that's where all of the root activity is taking place, and these grass plants are breaking down and going back into the soil. Just beneath that, where this darker color is, you start to get into your topsoil layer. So this is only a couple of inches deep, but basically you can see that the plant roots are infiltrating down. You can't see them now, but the earthworms were very active in this when I broke it apart. So there is some earthworm activity in here, and this section of soil is actually very full of life. So people don't really consider soil to be alive, but if you took a handful of this soil, there are more microorganisms in this little section of soil than there are people on Earth. And those microorganisms include bacteria, protozoa, not to mention all of the bigger organisms that you guys are familiar with, like earthworms and little nematodes and things like that. So this is full of life. And these plants act as shelter for those microorganisms, and they also provide them with food. So the microorganisms are feeding off of the root of the area around the roots of these plants, and then this acts as shelter for the microorganisms, and the microorganisms secrete a substance that makes nutrients that are broken down available to those plants in turn. So they're kind of working together. As you move down in the soil profile, this is actually your subsoil layer, getting into your parent material. So as many of you probably have learned in school, that soil forms from rock breaking down. And so that rock layer is a little bit deeper than what I have dug out here. But that material breaks down. You can see some of the rocks here. And then over time, as that weathers, it becomes this layer called the subsoil. And some of these roots have made it down in there. There's probably some organisms hanging out in there. But this is getting into a little less fertile because it is actually more mineral particles than organic particles. So that's this structure here. If you move over to here, as I said before, it's the same exact soil type. Here is again that subsoil layer. This is more subsoil and some organic matter here. The difference in the 2 soil types is that I've tilled this up. So this soil lacks the kind of structure that this has. And when we talk about soil structure, it means that it has good air space, good pore space. There's roots that are making their way down here. It's very strong. If I turn this on its side and I could step on it, it's not going to do anything. It's very stable soil. However, because there is little structure in here, because I've turned it over, and there isn't any root mass protecting this, if I were to step on this, it just kind of crumbles. Like I said, we had a lot of rain today. The soil from this sample, when it got rained on, the water essentially was able to soak into the structure and move down the soil profile, so it's pretty much almost dry now. This is still very wet, but this is kind of the sample that I want to use to illustrate a point that we all need to learn more about, and that is probably erosion. So I don't know how much you guys know about erosion, but erosive forces will act on this to kind of cause the soil to slough off whenever water hits it. So if a raindrop hits this soil, the splash will displace these soil particles. And I know it doesn't sound much because how big is a raindrop? But if you put those all together into the kind of rain we had this morning, then you'll start to notice the brown water flowing in our creeks and across the roads. that is soil particles that are ending up in suspension of that water and getting carried off of the site they are originally on. Now, topsoil is a precious resource. It takes a long time for an inch of topsoil to form, so we don't like to see soil leaving the site. We want to protect as much of it as we can, because once it goes into the creeks and gets washed away, it's pretty much gone forever. So this is just an example of how different practices can make soils more susceptible to erosion or less susceptible to erosion. When a raindrop hits this grass here, like I said, the splash might happen, but it soaks into the ground. So these are the two different soils. We have a model right beside them that's going to kind of illustrate more about the topic of erosion and how it affects us in our daily life and how it can happen very easily without us really even realizing it. And I told the other classes, this is the one job where your hands can be dirty every day and your mom can't yell at you because it's just part of the territory. So this is what we call a watershed model. And this kind of is just a smaller scale version of just the way we live. I mean, you could picture these as being the hills of the towns around us. This could be the nearest river or lake. Of course, these are our roads, and these are some of the hilly areas. And this illustrates a watershed. So any drop of rain falling at any point in this area is all going to drain to a central location, which is this lake here. And I've put some different land uses on here. Here we have a subdivision where most of the houses are already in, but they're constructing a new house. We have a logging site here where they might be taking some trees out for timber to produce paper. And then here we have a different kind of operation where we have a farm field where the farmer is maybe plowing up his fields. And then we have some livestock in here as well. And one thing I am going to add, because this is an important topic, soil particles, especially the smaller particles like clay, have the ability to bind to nutrients. So when people add fertilizer to a soil, it kind of gets picked up in those soils. So say this farmer maybe applied a little bit of fertilizer as well, and then these guys up here wanted to fertilize their lawn, so they added a little fertilizer also.
Wendy, I certainly appreciate all the information you're sharing with us, and you have about 2 minutes. Incidentally, we can hear you so much better. It's going wonderfully. So
great. All right, well then we'll get to it. I just want to show you really quickly what happens when it rains, which I'm sure a lot of you saw this morning with all the rain that we had. So this will be my rain, and I'll try not to spray my camera woman here. But when it rains on these soil particles, drive that little guy out of the way, the rain starts picking up those soil particles and carrying it into these bodies of water. And in some cases, if there's fertilizer tied up in those soils, they actually start making their way to the water as well. And when that happens, too much fertilizer in a body of water can be a really bad thing, especially if you've heard in the news some things about some of our lakes having algal blooms and things. It's because too much fertilizer, and not just from agricultural sites, fertilizer from house sites is making it there as well. So that just kind of illustrates that. I'm sure, like I said, on the way to school this morning, you saw a lot of muddy water, and that's pretty much how that happens. So real quickly, I just want to say a couple things about what we can do to maybe alleviate some of that. You know, we just have to try our best to keep the soil covered up. When a farmer is tilling fields, they can use practices such as no-till, where they can just plant directly into the crop residue on top. They can also use cover crops to keep that soil covered. Not that tillage is bad. That's a tool in an agricultural toolbox that still needs to be used, but it just takes a different kind of management to make sure that soil doesn't leave the property and that fertilizer stays where it needs to be. Up in the logging site, you could put in gravel to keep the water from giving out onto the soil from giving out onto the road. And then up here in the subdivision, they could use something called silt fence, which kind of holds that soil in place where they could mulch it until they can get back there and work on it. So that's just a couple of ways. Part of my job is to help people figure out ways to help protect their soil resource, and I think that's all I have for right now.
thank you so much, Wendy, and the students will be asking you questions. Now we're going to have Mr. Dopp talk about his tree farm.
Hi, thank you for joining us today at Hangout Tree Farms. I'm going to talk about the business cycle of tree farming, and then I'm going to talk about 3 different tree species that we have on the farm. I'm going to start in January, when January and February is full of snow, so there's not much we can do on the tree farm because there's so much snow. I mean, we can go sled riding, but that's not really helping the business. As soon as the snow melts, the land in the soil is completely saturated, so you might get stuck. There's not much we can do, but what we do is we start getting the stumps out. The stumps are humongous. I know some of you have seen tree stumps on the roads or just anywhere, but we got to get that whole entire root system out, so that's what we're doing in March. Once that's done, a real big part of our season picks up is when we start selling the trees that are ball and burlap. So we get our big machinery out, the soil is a little bit more unsaturated, so a little more firm, like Wendy was talking about, and we start going out and we start taking orders for ball and burlap trees. This is the time when most of our workers are here, because when you pick up your Christmas tree, it probably weighs 5 or 6 pounds. But when we're talking about a ball and burlap tree, we're talking 250 to 300 pounds. So there's many of us that are working on the farm during that time. We have some huge machinery that comes down in a triad, picks it up, and we have to put it in our basket and burlap it and wrap it around. And we do that probably from the end of March all the way to the beginning of May. Once the beginning of May happens and all the showers from April are done, we start the real TLC, the tender loving care of the tree farm business. We're mowing the grass, and when you have about 45 to 55 acres, you're mowing the grass all the time. When you have 36,000 trees, you're also shearing them. So you know the Eden Park tree that picks up the little star, that's the shape that we want. So we have to get our upside down weed whackers, and we got to shape them all day, and then we got to pick up that stuff so it doesn't get into our tractors. So we're cutting 55 acres of grass, and we're shearing 36,000 trees. It's enormous. Simultaneously, we're also burning the weeds around them. So this way, when you come to our tree farm, some tree farms have weeds by the trees, and that's just not pretty. That's unacceptable to us. So we also burn around the trees so that when you get under there in December and you're cutting, there's not weeds in your way. As summer quits down and we don't have to mow quite as much, and all the trees are sheared and all the burning's done, fall arrives and we got to start thinking about selling ball and burlap again. So again, we do the same thing. The soil is starting to get a little bit less condensed, and we're able to manage the soil, so we're able to take some orders for the ball and burlap trees. It's not quite as much as the spring orders, because innately, planting a tree, you don't want to do it right before it becomes frozen tundra. I mean, you're just setting that tree up for failure, and you don't want that cold weather hitting that tree, especially when you shock that tree through ball and burlap. The success rate goes down from about 100% to 50-50. So that's not something that we promote. We rather sell ball and burlap early spring. So once the second ball and burlap season ends, we're looking at the beginning of November. Now we're starting to get to the fun season of selling the Christmas trees and the wreaths and the pine cones and just everything that goes along with Christmas. So in November, what we do is we sharpen our chainsaws, we get all of our axes ready, we clean the sleds, because when you're at a Christmas tree farm, the patrons go out, cut their own tree, and mush it this way. We got to make sure our equipment's ready. We got shakers, we have wrappers, we have a cool tool that actually drills a hole in the bottom of the tree and for a tree stand that has a spike. And so we're getting all that organized and ready. We're talking about when we're going to work and what time of people are going to come and getting schedules ready. We work from the Friday after Thanksgiving all the way to about the 23rd. We're open on Mondays and Fridays from about 3 to 5, 3 to 6, depending on daylight. And we're also open on the weekends. And this is just the best time of the year. We make great relationships with people. This is the time that we all live for. You know, there's a joke on the tree farm that we're selling happiness. I mean, people are coming happy and leaving happier because they got the best Christmas tree ever. And that's why I do it. It's for the people. It's not for the trees. It's actually for the people. And although you think of a farmer working by themselves, there's so much people interaction, which is why we gotta be good with people, kids. We have to be. This technology is wonderful, but it's people skills that we need, and this tree farm teaches that for sure. There's people that come, I only see once a year, but it's like they're my best friend. I just give them their best Christmas tree, and that's what it's about. It's that spark, it's that energy. So that's basically the cycle of our Christmas tree business. We have 9 different species of Christmas trees, and I'm going to talk about 3 of them. So we got the white pines. As you can see, the white pines have these long needles, and they're very, very sappy. So these Christmas trees are going to kind of be flimsy. Can't really hold the heavy ornaments. I try to not promote these. They're very sappy. Some people love them, some people don't. So one cool thing about these Christmas trees, and if you're really thinking about business, the turnaround on these trees is a lot quicker. Most trees take 7 years to hit full height for a Christmas tree. These might only hit 5. So now if you're talking about turnaround, you can sell more of these in 35 years than you can a regular Christmas tree. So in 35 years, you'll sell 5 of these you'll sell 7 of these compared to 5 of the other trees. And that adds up if you have thousands of Christmas trees. It's also good for lumber because they're growing quicker. You're going to be able to sell these as a resource for lumber quicker. Now, deer like them when they're younger, but as they mature, there's more sap. Deer don't want to get sap in their snout. So when they're older, they become a good landscaping tree, especially to prevent erosion of soil. If you look at some of the hillsides, and we were just at, not Spanky's, but where were we? Murray's. The hillside across the way from Murray's has a bunch of these planted because what the root structure is doing, it's prohibiting soil erosion from going down. And also just the windbreakers too. So lots of big companies like Giant Eagle really want white pines for that reason. Good for erosion and soil break. The other tree that, the second of the 3 this is a blue spruce. This tree is great for landscaping right from birth because it's so sharp, it's so pointy. They're also good for Christmas trees. It has that rich, that robust Christmas tree smell. If you think of past Christmases, we really like this tree. A lot of people do prefer these. The one downside that I think is after the 6 weeks of having your Christmas tree up, when you take these down, you're gonna get those little jabs in your skin and a little bit of blood. But if you like that Christmas tree smell, go for it. These are called blue spruces. Birds do not like these to create a nest in because you're going to get pointed, and deer want to stay away. So although we have a huge fence around all of our trees to protect the trees from deer and other wildlife, these have innate protection themselves. It's kind of like a porcupine, or a spruce pine. And then my favorite Christmas tree of all is called the concolor fir. One of the downfalls of concolor fir is that spiders are attracted to these. Spiders just like the aroma, and that's one of my favorite things is the aroma. The concolor fir smells like oranges. It's very citrusy. So when you're cutting down your concolor fir with a saw, there's just an explosion of oranges in your face. And when you put this up, and whether you are sleeping upstairs or downstairs, when you come up and you go in the room with the Christmas tree the next day, you just forget that you bought the Christmas tree. You're going to get hit with that great flavor. You're going to be reminded that's a cool tree. When I sell these, I always say you're having Florida Christmas, but it's only in Ohio. And my big selling point is rip off a pine needle, break it in half, and smell it, and it just, people are like, where do I get them? A lot of the people that are return customers come and say, I know what I want, it's a concolor fir, I know what I'm looking for, and that's awesome. These are our most popular selling Christmas tree at the moment because the salespeople are pushing them.
You have about 2 minutes.
Awesome. So some innate insects that live out there are spiders and some beetle bugs. Bumblebees. Bumblebees live in these white pines. The bigger the white pine, the bigger the hive. Sometimes there's even 2 hives on one tree. Imagine that. On the one side we have a huge hive, and this actually happened last summer, but on the other side we had another huge hive. So bumblebees love trees, and bumblebees are just needed in our environment. And then in all Christmas trees, lightning bugs just love to live. It's a natural habitat for lightning bugs. So I'm lucky enough to live on a Christmas tree farm. I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. They love bugs that light up. Who doesn't? So at nighttime in the summer, we just look out our back door and we see millions of lights. So that's one of the benefits of living on the Christmas tree farm. So thank you very much for joining us on your virtual field trip.
Well, thank you for giving your day to be with us. And now it's the students' turn. We're going to accept questions from you, and please speak loudly so that the presenters can hear you. And we're going to take questions in the same order as I introduced you, and then we'll go back to those classrooms again for a second round of questions. So first we've got Miss Best's room. We have someone who would like to ask a question from Mrs. Best.
Yes, he's coming. Say your name and then
I don't want to go up and ask her.
Okay. Go ahead, Ian.
How long does it take for a tree to mature for sale?
That's a great question. It depends on how big you want your tree. The average maturity is 7 years, is the average maturity. Great question.
Okay, Mr. Hawk and Miss Blackford's room. Question from you. And we'll give you 2 questions to ask since you're a double class.
How do you make gum from trees?
That is a great question that I would have to Google. Do you know? That's a great question, but you can. I've read that as well.
Is there another question from your room?
Yes, we do. She's coming. All right, Brooke.
Why do trees have rings around like the base? Yeah.
The rings actually indicate the growing years of life of that tree. So every year that a tree gets under its belt, so to speak, it gets a new ring. And interestingly, cut a tree down, you can kind of see what its history has been, if it's ever been a fire, anything like that, because those rings actually will show some of the life of the tree. Do you have anything to add?
Nope. Very well put.
Miss Marshall's room.
How does shatterproof glass and nail polish come from trees?
That is another great question that I would have to Google along with the gum. We're not into producing stuff like that yet, but I love these ideas. You're making my brain go.
Yeah, I'm glad we have Google to help us out, because I certainly don't have answers either. Mr. Baum's room.
Why do trees take long to grow?
Speak louder.
Why do they take long to grow?
Why do trees take long to grow?
You speak loud.
It just depends. Actually, there's different trees that grow at different rates. So some of these pines, like he said, the white pine, they just tend to grow a little faster. And some of the ones, like this one, the palm color, it will take a little bit longer. And it's the same with trees that you see in the woods. Your big oak trees, they take a really long time to grow because they have a nice solid structure. And when you have storms and things, you'll notice that the branches don't tend to break off. Whereas your silver maples and other maples tend to grow really quickly, so their structure might not be as strong. So in storms, their branches tend to break out a little bit.
And it's just like humans. I mean, look around your classroom. There's probably someone 6 foot and someone 3'5". It just depends on the nutrients you put in your body and how your body reacts to it. Same with a tree.
Yep.
We have trees at the bottom of a hill that don't live because they're being too saturated with water.
And one thing that I would like to add is the connection, the obvious connection for soil and trees. Mr. Dopp, I imagine that your trees are grown on hilly ground. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that helps to hold that soil in place. Wendy talked to us about how important it is to keep that soil in place so that we don't lose that topsoil, and trees do a wonderful job at that.
It's funny that you mentioned that. Earlier I went in the middle of the tree farm, and we have a huge road that separates a field, and that road was very mushy, and I couldn't get traction. I almost like flipped the vehicle I was in. So I came home, back to the barn, in the middle of all the trees, and it was firm as anything because those roots are keeping that soil together.
Yes.
Good point.
Yes. Mr. Glazer's room. Question from you. We're having a problem with the audio.
Maybe they should type the question.
Yes. Mr. Glazer, could you type the question?
Rita, you might be able to go on to the next classroom till it's typed.
Okay. Mr. Glazer, you go ahead and get that question, and we'll go on to our next class. We're going back to the beginning again. Mrs. Best's class. Question from you. Okay.
My name's Tony, and I wanted to know how long you've been growing trees.
How long we have been growing trees? We're on our 10th year of growing trees. It's a slow process, like someone mentioned earlier. Teaches you patience.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Hawk and Miss Blackford's class will take 2 questions from you.
Why does clay soil get really hard like brick?
Oh, great question. I knew there was somebody that was going to notice that. So clay soils have very tiny particles. There's 3 different types of particles generally in soil. They're your sand, your silts, and your clays. Your sands are, of course, like sandboxy sand. Your silts are very soft, like flour. So if you roll them into a ball, they might form a ball when they're damp. But if you poured water on them, they would just kind of disintegrate. And your clays actually are even tinier particles than that. So when you roll them into a ball, I always tease some of the classes that I teach and say, if you roll clay into a ball and throw it at your friend, it's probably going to hurt because it's not going to break. You're right. But the particles are so tiny that they can bind together very strongly, and that's why it makes it really hard. And then when that clay dries out, it tends to crack, and then when you get it wet again, you can make it form back into clay. So that was a great question. So it has to do with the particle size of the clay.
And another question from your classroom?
Yes.
If the soil gets too wet, can it damage the trees?
Absolutely. It can compromise the integrity of the system. The soil could be washed away, exposing the roots, and when the roots are exposed, the life expectancy is diminished because we might mow over the roots. Absolutely. Great question.
Some trees actually hate growing in water. So you'll notice that different trees, as you get older, certain trees like more wet environments and some hate wet environments. So some of these trees just don't even really want to have their roots that wet. So it compromises the health of the tree.
Miss Marshall's class, a question from you.
On average, how many trees do you plant at a time?
So we've only actually had to plant 4 times so far because we're still in our first, I'd say, business cycle. And if you take 36,000 and divide by 4, you're at 9,000 trees. Now, thankfully, we have equipment that we can sit on, and the tractor splits the earth, and we just drop it. There's 2 people, and we sit on and we have buckets of saplings, and we just drop them. Coming up, either this fall or next fall is when we're going to have to use an auger and do it more handheld. We'll probably get about 2,000 or 3,000 in.
Okay, a question from Mr. Baum's class.
Evergreens stay alive in winter?
How do they stay alive in winter? They kind of go into what I would call hibernation, I guess. Especially, there's 2 different types of trees. You have your conifers, which keep their needles all year, and then you have deciduous trees, which lose their leaves in the fall. So they don't shut down their systems essentially, but they kind of go into what I call some sort of hibernation, so that they're protected from. They're not in an active cycle of growing. They're just kind of chilling out there and taking up a little nutrients from the soil to stay alive. And some trees don't survive winter well. If you have a tree that is from Florida, say, and that's typically grown in warmer climates, and you bring it to Ohio, it's probably not going to be able to survive our cold temperatures.
Mr. Glazer's room, let's try your microphone again. It simply wasn't working last time, and I didn't see any questions typed yet. So let's try again and see if you can ask us a question. Okay, your microphone still is not working, so if you could please type us your questions, we'll be glad to answer them. But we can't understand what you're saying, so I'm sorry about that. We're going to do one more round of questioning, and before we start this round, I want to say to you students, I truly appreciate the good questions that you're asking, and I truly hope that you've learned something today about soil and trees that you can share with friends and family. So let's go to Mrs. Best's room. What question do you have?
My name's Landon. Do conifers prefer sand, silt, or clay soil?
Oh, so different tree types prefer different types of soil. Most everything, there are some that don't mind sandy soils, but you have to remember that your more silty and clay soils are holding the most nutrients. Because those particles are smaller, they're able to hold the soil nutrients closer in there, so that most trees of any kind really kind of prefer those sand or silty and clay soils. But there are some trees, different types of trees, that prefer sandy soils. At any rate, most trees like the soil to be well drained versus being wet all.
Okay, Mr. Hawk and Miss Blackford's room. 2 questions from you.
What are some problems about trees that you can't solve?
It's a good question. Needle cast is one. We have that right now, and we had it earlier. And needle cast is just a disease that gets in the needles of the trees, and it's currently in one species on our field to my left, probably affecting 1,000 to 1,250 trees, and they look anemic, they look dehydrated, they look horrible. So the way that we solved it the last time is we were just patient. We just waited, and we got lucky, and it solved itself. Right now, this needle cast, we're not able to solve it right now, so we're being patient and crossing our fingers, but that is a great question.
And another question from that room.
How do you plant trees?
Well, there's 2 ways. We have a huge tractor, and the tractor splits the earth, and then we're sitting on the back, and we have buckets full of seedlings and saplings, and we just pop it in, and the machinery puts the earth back together. Or you can do it by hand, and you get a huge auger, and you drill a hole about 2 to 3 feet deep, and you put the seedling in or sapling in, and then you fill it up again with dirt. And I prefer the first method of sitting.
And in your Ag Mag, it does give you directions for planting a tree, and I hope you students think about planting some trees. Ms. Marshall's room, question from you.
What types of cosmetics come from trees?
I do not know that answer. That is an awesome question. I know that gum and glue and certain makeups, but I can't give you other specifics than that.
Yeah. That's another one we can just lean on Google. Mr. Baum, question from your room.
What happens when you plant a tree in the winter?
It's probably not going to live. The best times to plant trees are actually in the spring right now, or in the fall before that tree goes dormant for the winter. If you try to plant it in the winter, the ground is either going to be frozen or too cold, and it's probably going to kill off the roots. The trees that he's talking about planting for the most part are small like this. They're seedlings, and so their roots are extremely fragile. And if you plant it in the middle of the winter when the soil is cold and the weather is bad, it's probably just not going to
Mr. Glazer's room, we still did not get any typed questions from you, and I don't think we can, that your mic is not working. I'm really sorry about that.
They could write it on a paper and hold it up to the camera.
Oh, yes. Would you like to write it on a paper and hold it up to the camera? And while they're doing that, I wonder, Michelle Speck from Tuscarawas County, and Carol and Jefferson in Harrison County has been helping us with this video recording. I wonder if you could turn around and show the tree farm that's outside the barn. We had to do this inside the barn because the wind made it hard to hear. So could you do that? Take us out and show us a few of the trees?
We're going to let.
Here we go.
We're going to let Chris Dopp, Principal Dopp, tell us about this beautiful tree farm.
Okay, so this is the one field that we have, and there's about 24,000 trees on this side, and there's about 9 species over there, and we have it sectioned off so that it's easy for the buyer to roam around the field. We have white pines first. They're the first 12 rows of trees, and they're huge, and they're the ones that grow faster. And then after that, we have the blue spruce, which are the sharp ones, which I talked about. And then you're going to get into your firs, your concolor firs, your Douglas firs, your Canaan firs, and your Fraser firs that we got going on in here. As you can see, we put up a huge fence around the way. That fence was actually, before I moved down, that fence used to have tons of electricity going through it, 22,000 volts. We wanted to keep the deer out. And now it doesn't have any voltage because there's 2 young Dopps running around the farm right now, and we don't want to, hurt them in any way. So this is the farm. This is the first field that we had. This is the oldest field. It's about 10 years old.
Kurt Schweiger said the question. He wants to know what each of you, Wendy and Mr. Dopp, what do you like best about your jobs?
I like getting to work with people who are interested in natural resources. When people get excited about wanting to take care of natural resources, that's the favorite part of my job. It's really nice to get to know people. It is the people part of it, like Mr. Dopp said. That's probably my favorite part of the job. Not to mention, when I was a little kid, I always wanted to be outside in the mud and in the dirt, so I get to do that every day for my job, and that's really rewarding.
Just like Wendy said, it's the people. I know in November, on that Friday, there's a couple that come from West Virginia. I don't know their names. I know what they look like, and I know we're going to have a great conversation about the best Christmas tree that I ever had and the new Christmas tree they're going to pull out. It's about people, and that's why I do what I do. It's about people.
And I suspect that's the reason you've given your day to be with us today, is to talk with the students and help them to understand your job. It's time to wrap up our Google Hangout, and we appreciate very much you presenters giving your time to do this. And students, I hope you look at your Ag Mag and share it with your family and maybe do some of the projects that are listed on there. Thanks to the teachers and the students, and to Jennifer Barnett, who is doing the background scheduling and the trial runs with the teacher. And thanks to Farm Bureau for giving you those Ag Mags. And teachers, be sure to go online and sign up for our last Farmtastic Adventure for this year. It's Pizza Pizzazz, and it was scheduled for May 8th, but we've had to change the date, and we're going to do it on May 15th. For more information, go to agventures.hangout@gmail.com. And remember, agriculture produces the house you live in, the chair you sit on, the clothes you wear, the food you eat, and the job where you work. See you next time, and have a super great day. Thank you.
The chipmunk laugh.